What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 106 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Flip Screen Games' weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today, as always, by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, Steve. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Sort of talking about more SteamOS in the back half of the show. It seems like we
can't get away from that topic.
Over Valve, that's all they're working on, which I'm happy about. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be like more annoyed by the fact that it's like all that's happening if we hadn't been waiting for it for so long. That it's like, okay, yeah, great. Like, give us news, right? Like, get us to that full release that we've been waiting for. But we have something exciting to talk about at the front. This is something that you and I we've talked about on this show in the past. We've talked about on other shows, something we've been looking forward to for a long time. And even more so once we became Steam Deck players, or owners, I should say, which is that Red Dead Redemption Remastered finally coming to PC. And not even just the remaster, Red Dead Redemption finally coming to PC, right? Never been on PC before. Crazy.
Yeah, it's very strange that like this is finally happening. Like, what was the holdout? Like, I know we got it on PS4 and Switch last year. Was there some kind of exclusivity there that they couldn't release it on PC at the same time? But like, so many of their games are on PC. Obviously, all of the Grand Theft Auto games, going all the way back to the like 2D ones.
Well, and like Red Dead Redemption 2 came out on PC, but they just never bothered to port Red Dead 1. And I wonder if it's like maybe a victim of just like timing, of like PC gaming was kind of in a low point when that game came out, right? Like that console generation was kind of generally a lower point for PC compared to where it is now. But like the demand's been there since. I mean, right? Like, it's how many anniversaries? That had a 10-year anniversary like several years ago, right? Like, you'd think that at some point they would have just been like, yeah, why not pay somebody to port it over and just like start printing money every time there's a Steam sale.
I mean, they have paid someone to port it over now. Double 11 is seemingly doing the porting work, who've worked on games like the Harry Potter Lego collection, Minecraft Dungeons, and
they're one of those studios that's like, this is what they do. Like, they like port existing games to other platforms and, help people leverage their IP.
And seemingly the games that they've ported have been well received. Minecraft Dungeons is a good port. I've not had any complaints on that.
I mean, even this one, right? The Red Dead port, when it came out, I don't remember there being any negative conversation around it, really, right?
There wasn't, but don't really know how that translates to PC, because there's always a possibility that when these games make it over off of a console onto a PC, that's when problems arise. We've only got to look at like the stuff that's going on, the Naughty Dog games. To see the problems that can arise.
I guess you hope that this would be a little simpler, just because it's such an old game, right? That it's like even a remastered version of it, like its technical requirements are, not heavy, right? Like, this is something that you should theoretically be able to play on pretty much any modern PC. I mean, this played on the Xbox 360, right? Like, which by today's standards is, very, very archaic, right?
Yeah, it runs on a potato. This thing can run on a GTX 960 with minimum requirements.
I mean, it runs on Switch, right? Like, the Switch is not powerful, right? Like, what gaming PC, any PC do you own that doesn't have the same benchmarks as a Switch? Should be okay.
So
you hope.
I would very much expect this to run flawlessly on the Steam Deck, especially when you consider Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the most played games on Steam Deck every single month. We get the charts come out. It's always up there. I would imagine this a kind of original Red Dead Redemption is going to also make its way onto the charts when it finally comes out on October 29th.
You'd think so, right? I mean, like, again, even just I think the fact that people have been like waiting for it for so long, right? That it's never been available on PC. Like, how many players are there that like maybe played Red Dead Redemption 2 and like want to, see John Marston's story play out, right? Or like have wanted to play it but have never been a console player and have just never, put sticks on it, but now can get their in. Yeah, you hope that it comes and it's a clean launch and that, that it's a big win because, I mean, like, this is one of my favorite games of all time. You know, it's like such an iconic game, and it's crazy that it's not playable on PC. And I know when we got our Steam Decks, this was one of the first games I was like, oh, I would love to replay this on Steam Deck. And it just,
I think a lot of people went straight to emulators, right? It was like, oh, can I boot up the Xbox emulator, Zinnia? Can I play it over there? Because there's no way of playing this on PC otherwise, other than emulating a copy of a disc I have. Like, I can put that disc into my Series X, and I own Red Dead Redemption on disc, and I can play it. Why was that not possible on PC for decades? I mean, how old is this game now? Like 15 years old?
Yeah, I mean, I think correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's 2008 or maybe even 7. I was in high school when it came out, you know?
Yeah, so the first one was Revolver in 2004, and then it looks like
that was a PS2
Red
game.
Dead Redemption was 2. And then it looks like Red Dead Redemption was 2010, so it's coming up to 15 years old next year.
Okay. Yeah, man. I mean, it's a long time. And again, it's like, it's not a game that I feel like is really like fallen out of the conversation, right? Like, I think it's like a game that people still are probably asking for and talking about. So it's just weird that it took this long, but I mean, I'm glad to see it finally happen.
Yeah, me too. I thought maybe there would have been some more PC treats in there that they usually seem to do, but this seems to just be a straight port from the console version over to the PC.
Right, and it is a remaster, not a remake, right? Like, it's fairly limited in its scope. I think it's just like, honestly, I think this release on PC is a way bigger deal than it was on console, because it's like, I mean, on Switch, I guess it was whatever. It was like, that was a cool thing, but like the differences on the PS4 version are kind of like, or the PS5.
PS4 was a big deal because it was a PS3 game, right? And
yeah, I guess that's true. It's 2 generations.
And there was no way of shoving that into your PS4 or your PS5 to play it. Whereas on the Xbox, they never got a re-release. You can just download it with smart delivery, and it's the Xbox 360 version that played on your Xbox One. Or
plays like it's brand new, which is pretty sick.
And it just carries on playing. And that has some other perks to it, like it has frame rate boost and things like that Microsoft has put in. But you know, I can imagine the modders are going to get let loose on Red Dead Redemption when it hits PC at the end of the month, and we're going to see all manner of things. Pete, I have a confession, never finished this game. Probably should at some point. Maybe this is one I download on Steam Deck and play over the break, and I just kind of finally get through it.
I mean, I think it would be worth it. You know, I think it, I don't know. It's an interesting one for me because it's a game that, like, I have such a strong memory of the parts of it that really, really, like, struck a chord with me. And my memory of it has always been that, like, oh yeah, like it holds up largely, right? Like, it's a really great story, and you know, it's very moving, and there are a lot of really cool moments in it, like reveals, right, that happen that are like, whoa, like, you know, that at least at the time really blew my mind, right? And it's one of those games that, like, I've always come back to as like one of my favorites. But I'm not super surprised to hear that you didn't finish it, because it is, I think, the kind of game that can be your kryptonite, where it's just like, it's fucking massive, and there's, I mean, I guess by today's standards it's probably not, but like at the time, right, it's like, it's a very big game that's easy to just kind of get lost in, and I feel like it's so easy to have. That's generally been my experience with Bethesda games, right? Like, I rolled credits on Fallout 4 this year, and that was the first time I ever beat a Bethesda game. But I put like 80 hours into Skyrim, you know, and it's just like, you hit a point where you're like, I've had my fill. Like, I get it, you know, like I get it.
When I get to that point in a Bethesda game, though, that's when I go, right, probably should get back to finishing that main quest, because I kind of want to see where that's going.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's what you have to do with these kind of games.
And I think Red Dead is one that is really worth rolling credits on. At least I think so. I know it's like one of the well-worn stories that I trot out when people ask about games that really moved you or moments that really, you know, and it's like the ending of Red Dead Redemption is a moment that I've heard a lot of people list off as one of those moments. And like, I have such a vivid memory of when I was playing that game, and you know, maybe this is to some people an indictment on its pacing, but there are like 2 or 3 times in the game where I was like, surely this is the end of the game, right? Like, this is such a like culminating moment, and then it's like, no, like there's yet another wrinkle to the like thing you've been chasing.
Is that in a good way? Because I felt like that with The Last of Us Part 2, right? And there was one too many in that. But I feel like that wasn't necessarily. I did think the end was impactful. I thought the end of that game was phenomenal. I think it just needed an editor to just go, no, we don't need this.
It's like that last it's the last stretch between the 75% point and the ending where you're like, okay, it's getting a little long in the tooth, and there's definitely a section of the game where it's kind of like, I feel like you've established this theme, right? And it's kind of done. I personally don't feel that way about Red Dead Redemption because I think it's last fake out, the last time that you're like, how is there more game? It's actually almost over. Like, so you're like, okay, cool, this is it. The first time it happens, and this is like a spoiler for a 15-year-old game, so I think it's safe to say.
Is it safe to say it's just coming to
all right, you're right. Fine. Because it's not like a story moment necessarily, but like there's a point where you get deeper in, right? And there's this moment, and I think people will know what I'm talking about, right? Where you cross a border, I'll say. And there's a, like, it's just this very dramatic, cinematic moment, and you're like, oh, there's this whole other section of the game. Some people think that part's a little long in the tooth and that you could do with some trimming, which fair enough. But what I really liked about it is that, like, I think that the narrative of that story is so much about how John Marston is like a relic, right? Like, he is a cowboy who is like out of, like, he's at the end of the end of the Old West, you know? And like the opening scene is like these guys from the government who driving in a car, right? And that, like, they're like this representation of the American government, like pushing west and having more control and establishing like a stricter rule of law. And, you know, I feel like the kind of journey that he goes on as a character, like through the kind of 3 acts of the story, like really, really artfully explore that. And, you know, I think I probably am also a little bit more inclined to connect with it because my dad is like a big fan of Westerns. They were like a big genre in America when he was growing up. So he's has a real affinity for like the Old West. So I'm very familiar with the tropes of those stories. And I remember playing through it and just being like, wow, like I was just so locked into the narrative. And it does such a great job of kind of like establishing expectations for you and then, like, you know, pulling out the rug in a way that feels satisfying, not that feels like a bait and switch, right? And it does that, like I said, like 2 or 3 times, I think, really effectively. But yeah, I remember finishing the game and had the moment of like, wow, I can't believe there's another section. Like, I guess I have another 10 hours or whatever. And then the game just kind of like somewhat abruptly ends. And I was like, I remember literally going and just like standing in the shower and just like letting the water hit me and just being like, fuck, like that was crazy. Like, what a culmination. And like, you know, I think it was a time when, you know, narrative in games was evolving, and it was one where I was like, that just felt so like that could have been a novel, you know?
Yeah.
Which, you know, I again, there's probably things about it that don't age well. It's 15 years old, you know, but
I mean, I think you could say that about any piece of media, though, right?
It happens,
and
yeah.
Somewhat, I think you need to. Sometimes I feel like you need to look at it and review it as if it's against its kind of I can't remember the word.
Like cultural context?
No, like you've got to measure it against, like, you know, what else came out that year. Was this a special game for that era, or do you measure it against, you know, this is the remaster coming out in 2024? Do we judge that as a new game and pitch that up against like games of today?
Right.
It's new to a lot of PC players. Like, should this be judged on its own merit?
And I think there's value in both of those kinds of assessments because I think that when you evaluate a piece totally removed from its cultural context, I think you do yourself and the piece of art a disservice because, you know, obviously when it comes to things like, you know, like how cultural attitudes have changed and things like that, I think that there's, I think a risk of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater with certain things like that, where it's like there are pieces of media that by today's standards are problematic, but at the time were progressive, and I think having that cultural context can allow you to appreciate those works for what they are. But then I think that there's kind of the other side of that fence, and you and I have talked about that a lot when you get into the conversations of like greatest games of all time, right? And it's like, well, in that conversation, are you talking about influence? Are you talking, because it's like, I think there's an argument to be made that if you can't sit down and play it today and still have fun, is it really one of the best games of all time? Or was it historically very significant and we want to, pay homage to its role in history, right? And those are kind of two different conversations. But, I guess my hope and my belief is that this game does still hold up, and that regardless of it was good for its time, it's still good now. But I guess I don't know. And that's, I guess, the fun but also the risk of going back to games like this is like having that, those rose-colored glasses removed. And I don't think that necessarily like changes anything, because if I went back and played it now and was like, like I don't stand by this the way I thought I did, that doesn't change the influence it had on me at the time.
Have you done that with anything before? Because I've had that, not necessarily with games, but like I'll go back and I'll watch a beloved movie from my childhood or a TV show from my childhood, and I'm like, damn, this has ruined the experience for me. Like I had such a vivid picture of what this was in my mind and what it meant for me and the impact it had on me.
You're asking if I've ever had something where like it ruined it?
Yeah, going back to something in your adult life. And
I don't think so. Like, because I feel like most of the stuff that I really, really like love, that I hold super near and dear to my heart, right? Like,
I mean, you ruined 30 Rock for me.
Yeah, I did do that for you, and I feel bad, which is, and it's like, there are things like that, for sure, where it's like, oh, you know what? No, there is one that I totally forgot, and it's, I think, evidence of how much I've removed it from my mind, is How I Met Your Mother. Which is a television show.
God.
But I used to love that show, but I can't watch it anymore. It's like, there's so many things about it that are like, woof, and it's not old enough to make excuses for, right? Like you're saying of like, oh, cultural context. It's like, nah, this was like 5 years ago, and it's already like, no. And now it's not. But at the time, right? Like I went from being a very big fan of it to just in just a few years being like, yeah, there's a lot of this I find genuinely offensive, because my attitudes have evolved. That's probably the only one I can think of, though. Because, I mean, I wouldn't say that, like, with games, that never really happens to me where it ruins it. Like,
No, with games, I usually get it where I go back and I'm just like, yeah, this maybe wasn't as good as I remembered, or I can't see myself spending as many hours on it as I did. Like, I think back about, like, Toy Story 2 on the PS1, for example, and I played that on the Steam Deck many times. I can play a level and then I'm kind of done with it. I've had my fill of it, and I can move on to something else because it doesn't capture me in the same way that it would capture me as a child.
Yeah, and I think with some stuff like that, there's also the difference of like I think a great example of that is something like your relationship to like Sesame Street or something, right? Where it's like, yeah, like I loved Sesame Street when I was like 3 years old or whatever, but like I've aged out of that now, and it's not like I'm like anti-Sesame Street, and if I see Cookie Monster, I'm like, yeah, I have warm feelings for that character or whatever, but like I'm not out here watching it, right? Because it's like I'm not the demographic anymore, right? Like the Toy Story 2 PlayStation 1 game was made for kids, and it's like you're not a kid anymore, so it's like if nostalgia isn't enough to carry you.
He loved that game.
What's that?
Don't tell my dad that. He loved that game.
But that's fair enough, but that's also like he loved that game at the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's been better games since then, as you would expect. That's like 25-year-old game.
So I think with stuff like that, it's like easier to be like, the experience I had with it was the experience, right? Whereas with something like, Red Dead Redemption, which is so narrative oriented, like there is, I think, a different kind of connotation with something like that. Like if you go back to a game that you're like, I love the story, and then you're like, oh, the story sucks, or like,
yeah,
or like,
I'm curious to see if there's discourse around it, because I remember when the Last of Us TV show came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and that like we're having the same conversations we were having back when the game came out, and then the remaster came out. We're having similar conversations online as to I can't believe Joel did that to Ellie. Like, was that the right thing?
That was very funny to me to see like that that exact conversation happen again from just like, you know, just TV watchers, and they're like, whoa, like what a moral decision, like what a cool ending. And it's like, yeah, right, like video games are cool, guys, you know, like they got cool stories. And yeah, you know, that's, I think, ultimately the legacy that Red Dead has in my mind, is like being one of the first games, not like that I've always felt like video games are art. I think even when video games were just toys, there was still art, right? Like, and the idea that art needs to be high art to be art is a very elitist attitude that I don't like. But if you're gonna be like, video games can be like high art, like they can, you know, make you cry, that, you know, like this was one of the first games where I was like, whoa, like that was a deep story, that was moving, you know, and not just like, I'm playing this game because it brings me joy to play it, right? It was like, and I feel that way about a lot of the side quests and stuff, and like some of the smaller moments.
So maybe this is one of the first games that's less you're playing it for fun, you're playing it for the experience. Because I feel like
that's a good way to put it.
Paradigm shift in this era, like the 360 PS3 era, where we started getting games like that. Obviously, we got Red Dead, we got The Last of Us,
BioShock, right? Like those were, that was like the first, and again, not first, right? But I think the first where there were like major, big, best-selling blockbuster games where part of the hook was this has a deep, emotionally complex story and it's made for adults, right? Not like, oh, like, this is charming in the way that, like, you might say that, like, you know, I don't know, like a Pixar movie is but I guess those get critical acclaim too. Trying to think of something more in the middle.
The Minions movie.
No, because they're garbage, right? Like, it's like, what's the middle ground of, but, you know, like something like that's like, oh, like this is good and it has artistic merit, but it's not like, you know, it's not, it's, you know, I don't know. I'm struggling to come up with what the answer to that is, but like, I think, I think you're onto something there. That was kind of a paradigm shift in that generation a little bit. And I think BioShock had a lot to do with that, was that, like, that came out and was like, whoa, like, what a totally like, and it's, you know, engaging with all these.
Opening to that when the splicers trying to get into the elevator and like, oh, I love the beginning of that game.
It's like the second or it's one of the like second or third like big interactions you have with one of them, where it's like the one who's like crawling on the ceiling. I've never been able to like, that scene just lives in my brain. I remember the first, like, I've got the gun pointed at the ceiling, just like waiting for it to drop down, you know, and it's like all the lights are off, and yeah, it's like really cool, really cool. Yeah, so I'm super interested to see how this ends up landing, like whether or not it makes a big splash or if it's just kind of like another game that's getting re-released. But I think it probably will be a little bit more of an event, just because like it's the first time it's coming to this huge market, right? Like there's so many PC gamers, and like, yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of them that have just never had the opportunity to play this game, and I hope they do.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, how many people have played Red Dead Redemption 2 but have never played Red Dead Redemption? There's got to be a huge slice of
probably
that
a lot,
audience, you know?
Right?
So
yeah,
hundreds of millions of copies. There's probably, you know, 100 million people that wanted to play Red Dead Redemption but didn't have the opportunity to, and now they get the option. I think I'm going to check it out. I don't know there's going to be one at launch. I think $50 is a reasonable price point.
it's not bad. I think it could probably be a little cheaper, but I think like with the fact that games are $70 now, it being $50, it's like, it's akin to what a $40 game used to be, and that feels about right. So, also, it's one that'll probably be on sale, right? Like not too long, because it's not this big major.
That's my feeling. It's, you know, Rockstar's games constantly go on sale. I would imagine we'll see this in the New Year sale in January, and I'll probably pick it up then.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one I'd really like to make the time to go back to. The last few times I've made the effort to do this, right? Like, I've felt very rewarded by it. There was a couple, like, I replayed the Dragon Age games, right? I replayed Mass Effect, and, like, those were games from this era that are, like, these are my favorite games, and I haven't played them in, like, 10 years, and I really hope they live up to, and it's like, they all have, and I would love for this to be another one of those stories, you know? So I'd like to make the time for it. Whether or not I get to it, it's coming out on October 29th. It's not a good time for it for me, but like you said, maybe
No,
December, maybe
Dragon
January.
Age there now.
Now, yeah, that's gonna be taking up all my attention until I platinum it, or wherever I play it. I don't even know where I'm gonna buy it, but yeah. So before we move on from this one, you had a question added at the bottom here, which was like, which other games do we want on PC? Are there any other like major holdouts for you? Because I would say this was it for me. Like,
yeah,
and maybe there's another one I'm not thinking of. But like, if you had asked me a week ago, what's the number one game that's not on PC that you'd love to be able to play on Steam Deck, I would have said Red Dead.
I mean, there's probably a bunch of PlayStation games that I'd love to come, like the whole Uncharted collection. I'd like to come over. Not just,
that would be really good. It's weird that they haven't
it.
done that, honestly, because it's the same thing, right? Where it's like, okay, so Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy are available, but like the Nathan Drake collection is not. So like, if you're a new player, the only ones you can get into are ones that are heavily rely on the history of the franchise, which sucks. It's like you're missing the whole story.
And I think the biggest PlayStation title is Bloodborne. We'd be remiss if we didn't shout that from the rafters.
That would be Max's choice if he was on.
Because he's off sick. Everyone go
wish him well.
Wish Max well.
He's been sick for like a week.
Yeah. It's going round. I got a cold as well. It's not good.
I'm gonna be yelling into a microphone by myself next week.
It's lucky that you're behind like a screen and you can't catch it. You don't want it. I think those are probably it. I'd love to see Rockstar's Table Tennis. They seem to forget about that game, and I really like it.
You bring that game
up?
I
really like that game.
I never think about that game until you mention it.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
I've never played it. I have to take your word for it.
And that's the problem. It's hard to play now. I don't think it's even one of the Xbox backwards compatible titles. So
really?
You need to kind of roll out some old hardware if you really want to play that game.
Yeah, it feels like a thing that they should just do, right? Just to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know that I have another good answer like Locked and Loaded, because I think, like, again, one of the other ones I would have said was like Ghost of Tsushima, and it's like that finally made the way over. So
one that I thought would have been really great is Dreams, but they just shut it down instead.
Yeah,
like feels like that would have felt so at home on PC. You had a keyboard and mouse that you could have controlled things with. You could actually pull things in from a file system. You could have given people a really solid game engine.
Yeah.
And then allowed them to release the games and kind of claw in some of the profit. It could have been your Roblox, but less toxic.
Yeah, they would have had to have, I think, had that in mind from the beginning, because I think once it was like up and running, it's just like the like PC is so much harder to control, right? Like, it's like, I know they had problems where they were like getting DMCA's against like Mario remakes and stuff like. It's like, I imagine how bad that would have been if it was on PC, But I am totally with you. I think that's, if they had their current mindset about PC when they started making Dreams, I think Dreams could have been a success. But yeah, I think it was just like too late to pivot at that point.
Yeah.
Speaking of PlayStation, before we move on, I just wanted to give you a chance real quick to pat yourself on the back, because you called this last week when we were talking about Horizon Zero Dawn getting that remaster, and like we were talking about like what's going to happen on Steam, right? Are they going to take down the original version? Will they leave the original version up, and then you can, decide whatever. And you were like, no, I'm sure they're going to take it down. And if you have the original one, like the store listing page will still be there, and you can use that to get the $10 upgrade, right? So that like, you're not punished for having bought it already, but anybody moving forward is going to be locked in on this remaster that probably requires the PlayStation Network. And
it does require the PlayStation.
Well, no, I was saying that was what you said, and you were like right on the money. Totally.
Yeah. Basically, everything we spoke about has been confirmed. Horizon Zero Dawn Complete Edition has been removed from Steam and the Epic Games Store. You can still get it on GOG currently, and I'd imagine if you look on key websites, if you really want this copy, if you're in a specific region that doesn't have the PlayStation Network, go and find a key before they're all gone.
I regret not buying one when they were like when it was like on sale for like $5 or whatever, right? It's like I should have just bought it.
Upgrade for a tenner, and now you're gonna have to pay full whack to get all of it lumped in together. But yeah, once again, they're continuing with their PlayStation Network requirement. So it's not available in more than 100
It doesn't
countries.
make any sense. There's
So
like no online in that game. Like, why bother?
no, exactly. Same deal with Until Dawn. No real need for it to have it. Same with God of War Ragnarok. No real need to have it. You could kind of understand it with Helldivers as an optional thing if you wanted to play it with PlayStation Network people. But the fact that they're just basically forcing everyone to have an account for what? To get more data, and that's
Yeah.
really the only reason. It just seems silly. Just give people an option to sign up for a PSN account anywhere. Or if you're in a region,
Right, that's what I was gonna say. It's like
bypass it.
if you're gonna force people to do it, you need to just make it region neutral, right? Like so that you can just do it, because it's like that's insane. It's insane that you're like taking entire countries off the board that could be buying your games. It's like you sell games, right? Like don't you know?
Yeah,
it's interesting. You wonder what they're doing with that data. Like maybe they sell it, right? Like but I mean, I don't know. I guess we would probably know that then, right? Ubisoft literally just got in trouble for that. They were like selling data to Meta without consent. So,
no, they're probably going to get bought by Meta next week. So we'll see what happens.
We'll see. Oh wait, is that on my predictions for this year? Still,
it wasn't your predictions
for this year though, or was it last year?
It might have been last year's predictions.
I don't remember. If it's this year,
if it happens, it's going to be like me, where everything that I predicted last year is coming true this year. Like the fact that PSVR 2 works with PC came true this year, and I predicted it last year.
We should make a short of that, of like every prediction that we made like 2 years too soon, you know, something like that. Like, so yeah,
just
come
ahead
on,
of the curve.
We're there. We get it, right? It's just the game, right? The gamifying of it is where we struggle. Okay, well, I let me know what you folks think. If you've got a game that you'd like to see on PC, like Red Dead, I would love to hear what other candidates that maybe we're not thinking of, or if there's like just some niche game that you really love that you'd love to see come. Yeah, all right, so we're going to talk some more about SteamOS, because that's what's going on these days in just a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of October. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to go and get supporting like they did, if you want to go check out those those sister shows, excuse me. If you want to keep the conversation rolling over on Discord, you can do all that and much more by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website, and that's the best way for you to keep in touch or get involved. So go over there and do that. All right, so Steve, talk to me about this. There is some ROG Ally code in SteamOS? What's going on there?
Yeah, some more. So if you'll remember, Pete, I think you may have been moving house when this story dropped. That Lawrence Yang confirmed in a story with an interview with The Verge that yes, they are indeed bringing SteamOS to the ROG Ally, and that it's a work in progress, and that they're kind of working to bring it to multiple platforms. The ROG Ally is just one of them. We saw some reference in update logs at that point, which is why The Verge spoke to Lawrence Yang about it, referencing keys on the ROG Ally. I think your cat's about to go on the wall again.
Oh, God damn it. Okay, hold on. Keep going.
Referencing keys in the Steam client side. This time, it's GameScope. There's been a recent merge into Valve's compositor, GameScope, that states the following. This introduces a display configuration for the ROG Ally and ROG Ally X handhelds. These devices feature the same 1920 by 1080p panel, which supports VRR and has a range limit of 48 to 120 hertz in the EDID. I tested the configuration on two separate units, ROG Ally SteamOS main, the date of the build with kernel 6.8.12-Valve 2-1, so that's an internal Valve build, and ROG Ally X SteamOS main, and then a slightly different build. So it looks like they're well underway at bringing SteamOS to the ROG Ally, and they're kind of going through the steps that they need to do it. They've got the buttons in now. It looks like this is going to allow the exact same feature set as we experience on the Steam Deck with the refresh rate slider, and that you'll be able to use that on the ROG Ally if you install SteamOS over there or use GameScope over there. So I think this is just one to keep an eye on. I really think that we are edging closer and closer to that SteamOS release. I'm getting the feeling that the ROG Ally is kind of their guinea pig. And then after this, they're probably going to go through and kind of make it a little bit more generic so that it can support more devices without them having to specifically say this is the ROG Ally X or this is the Steam Deck kind of thing.
That would make sense to me, right? Because you got to imagine that the ROG Ally is probably the handheld form factor that is like the most popular aside from the Steam Deck. So the idea of like, let's do a controlled launch of this very specific hardware and then kind of work our way back to something that is ideally adaptable to any screen, right, that has a similar form factor. And maybe even beyond that, right? Like, the stuff we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, right? Like Android devices and some of these other places. It makes sense, right? Like it makes sense to start with a smaller pool and then, build on that work.
Yeah, I think when you combine this news and the commit related to the ROG Ally and all the stuff we looked at in the last couple of weeks about the ARM pieces of code and the collaboration with the guys over at Arch Linux, it really feels like they've definitely amped up, and this has become their goal. Do you remember, I think it was last year, might have been the year before, in the lead up to the Steam Deck OLED release, and we got all of that stuff about HDR support and all in the main release and the preview channel. We saw stuff about HDR support in there, and like we got the new vibrancy slider and things like that. I feel like this is the same thing. I feel like we're getting little bits dropped here and there because it's an open source project and they program in the open. And at some point, we're going to just get a blog post from Valve over on the Steam website that says, Hey, you can install SteamOS on other devices now. Yeah.
So do you think that this is like driving towards like a bigger push? Like, because like, obviously the last 2 weeks we've talked about the ARM-based stuff and, what that would mean for SteamOS being able to work, or, just like that layer of compatibility with Android devices, or, like getting Steam to run on Apple and having like they all seem... It seems kind of convenient that they're all happening at the same time, no? Like maybe this is part of like a larger, I guess product release would be the way to put it, right? Of like, hey, like this is a thing that we're going to start pushing as a viable alternative to Windows.
I think that is what it is. I think there's a real drive forwards. I expect they're really probably sick and tired of waiting for Windows to become a viable option. There's so many people that I think I'll just have completely dismissed the idea of these handhelds because of Windows, and they don't want to go through that process. And they've dismissed the Steam Deck because maybe it's a little bit underpowered for them, or they can't play the games they want on it because it doesn't quite hit the horsepower that they want. If you could combine the two, like get a little bit more horsepower out of the ROG Ally with sacrificing battery, sacrificing thermals and audio levels of the fan, but shove SteamOS on there, like that's really the combo that you want. Like you've got the only real downside to it is the certain games you can't play because of anti-cheat like Battle Eye that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago with GTA 5 and obviously Destiny 2 kind of being a holdout. But I think if they have the installer, and this is finally the point where we can have that official dual boot on both the ROG Ally and also on the Steam Deck, that opens up a big range of possibilities for people. I probably would have dual boot Windows on my Steam Deck a long time ago if I could have utilized PC Game Pass, for example. I might not necessarily want to be playing games like Destiny 2, but if I could play Forza that I'm already paying for, I've already paid for, and it's a play anywhere game on Xbox, why would I buy that again on Steam if I don't have to? So I like to think that this is the start of a big push, but we'll have to wait and see.
Does this do anything for you? Like, I know it's something we've talked about for so long. Like, would you consider changing over, or?
Not this late in the game, I don't think.
Yeah.
I really feel like next year's the time that we start hearing about the next generation of these handhelds. Like the ROG Ally X, I don't think did enough for the price bump that they were charging for. You got a marginally larger battery and a slightly nicer designed case, along with a bunch of other small improvements. But it wasn't the level of improvement that I think we saw when we got the Steam Deck OLED.
Yeah.
I think that was, a marked improvement in every way over the original, and it really was kind of like, right, this is the definitive version of this version of the Steam Deck. And now they've probably started work on they probably immediately started working on the next version of the Steam Deck. And I think probably 2027 is maybe 2026, 2027 is when I expect to see a whole new generation where we start seeing like these the ones that maybe are powered by ARM, maybe are still using x86, but they're using a next generation chipset that still offers a level of efficiency that we have come to expect.
It'll be interesting to see how that all nets out because, I think when Valve rolled out the Steam Deck, right, there was kind of a bit of, I was a skeptic about it, right? Like it was like, is this a form factor that makes sense? And I think it clearly does, right? So it's like, where does that go from here? Right? Like where's the ceiling on this thing? Right? Like, is this always going to be a somewhat niche product, or as you can, drive costs down and increase power, does it become something that people are kind of increasingly thinking about if they want to experiment with PC gaming or they want to get into the Steam ecosystem, I wonder, because I wouldn't be surprised if, Valve putting out like kind of a 2.0 that then like gets another like another wave of us too. We also have one, like we've seen with the ROG and the INEOs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the Nova Legion Go, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw someone like Dell and Alienware, I think, was working on one. MSI did their disastrous one that was running on Intel instead of an AMD chip. I'd love to see someone, if Steam does come to ARM, shove an ARM chip in there. Let's experiment. Let's see what we can do. Start to compete on hardware and differentiate rather than them all kind of looking the same. And anything that's not the Steam Deck, they're all using the same chips. They're all using the same software because they're all running on Windows. They've just got, one of them's got Armory Crate, one of them's got Afterburner, and it's just like, oh, cool. We've got slightly different riffs on the same theme.
Yeah, it kind of feels like you're just like, it feels like a little bit akin to me to like building a PC where it's like you're just kind of like deciding on the minutia, right? Like rather than kind of like, oh, like I'm choosing this model for this functionality, or I'm doing, it's just kind of like which flavor of the same device are you going to go for? Are you going to get the Steam Deck? Or are you going to get an off-brand one? Okay, you're going to get okay. So what do you value the most, right? Is it like unique button combinations? Is it the highest possible technological ceiling? Is it Windows? Whatever, right? Like what are the points for you? So yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see because I also feel like there's a non-zero chance that a lot of the people that are doing it now like give up, because there's just it's too niche and there's not enough market share for handheld PCs for like 6 people to make them, and that like it's going to end up being like 2 or 3 people doing it, or something like that.
I think it probably will be 2 or 3 people doing it. I think it's going to be Valve, obviously, and then I think some of the bigger hardware manufacturers like Asus are already there. I think if Alienware wanted to make a go of it, they could. We could maybe see HP making a go of it if they really wanted to.
We've also talked about how like they're like seems to be varying degrees of plans for some kind of Microsoft handheld, right?
That
and
does, yeah.
whether that's,
but that could easily be like, we don't want to do this because we don't want to cannibalize on what the next Xbox's plans might be. That may have been something that was like, oh, we did this at Hackathon, isn't this cool? The higher up sort of was just like, yeah, we're going to kill that. We can't do that.
Yeah, it's just that feels like such a question mark, right? Because it's like you think about like what Phil Spencer has said about handhelds, and it's like it seems like they're working on something, and it's like, is that going to be more of a closed ecosystem? And it just runs on the Xbox OS, or it's like a companion to that.
And he seems to really like them as well. He's spoken about using the ROG Ally. He had that
He specifically
Logitech
mentioned the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck when he was asked about it by Ryan McCaffrey, like over the summer or whatever. Right? I remember we talked about it. So it's like, they're a company that it would make sense for them to do that. Obviously, hardware has been a mixed bag for them, and the idea that they would not want to produce their own device in-house also makes sense. But yeah, I don't know. If they are really going to try to double down on the whole Xbox is everywhere thing, right? Then it's it would make sense to maybe throw your hat in this handheld PC hybrid console market, because it is inherently a kind of niche thing, and the metrics for success, it doesn't need to compete with the Nintendo Switch, right? It just needs to be valuable to Xbox players, and that's all it needs to be. And maybe they're one of the big players in a couple of years because they have the money to do it, right? Even if they put out an inferior
maybe
product.
PlayStation might dip back in as well. I'd love to see that.
I think if they did it, it would be more of a walled thing, though. I think it would probably it wouldn't be it wouldn't be a handheld PC. But
I kind of feel like the next Xbox is going to continue to be that, and I don't know that Windows
factors into that.
Do they want that? Do they care? Is Windows just going to be like, oh, well, you can use Copilot to open Excel and write your presentation for you?
The only thing that makes me kind of go back and forth on it is I don't think it would be crazy because they have the Xbox app that interacts with Windows, right? If they made a handheld version of Windows, right? We talked about at that hackathon that we bring up all the time, and they just called that Xbox mode or something, right? And instead of it being handheld mode, and that's literally,
Oh yeah, I could easily see that. And
or you have a version of it that is that, right? Where it's it's very this is gaming, and it's yeah, it's a PC, and but it's in the same way that Alienware is a gaming brand, but it's made by Dell, right? Maybe that's you kind of try to bridge that gap more between Xbox and the Xbox on PC, which is a thing. It's not Xbox doesn't have the brand of Xbox doesn't have a presence on Windows. So the idea that you could just kind of roll that in and make it a hybrid kind of, it's a console, but also, which is already what the Steam Deck does, but lean more on the it's a console, but also it's a PC, rather than
I'd like to see
it's a
that
PC,
if
but
they
also
do it. If they do it, they've got to make it clear as to what Xbox means and what it is on PC and what it isn't on PC. I feel like, we got rid of Xbox Game Pass for PC. It became PC Game Pass because it was confusing. It wasn't all of your Xbox games that were on PC. It was only a certain selection. I can't bring over my Xbox library. I expect to log into Xbox because it says Xbox, and I expect to see my Xbox games, and they're not there. And I can see some people kind of falling foul of that if they buy one of these devices that maybe has an Xbox logo on it and Xbox mode and Xbox branding.
I think it would need to be able to play both, and that could be its claim to fame, right? Is well, you can play your Xbox games on your PC or on your console or on this hybrid device that's both. Right?
Yeah,
that's essentially you can do that with your Steam Deck, right? You can plug a mouse and keyboard in it and play a very traditional PC game on it, and it's fine. But it's also still a handheld console, has buttons on it, right? It's in all the ways that matter, it's a console, but it has all the functionality of a PC, and maybe that makes sense, right? But I don't know. I'm also just spitballing because you're the major hardware manufacturers, and it's they're not one of those, and
they are. I mean, they are,
and they have their leg in PC, right? So it's why not, right? Why not see that and be oh yeah, we could do that, right? Why not? Why not create this additional SKU that you can interact with your Xbox library in, and we make it in such a way where we judge it the same way that we judge the Steam Deck, where it's 1 million units was a big deal, right? Where it's the next PlayStation handheld, if it sells 1 million units, you're that thing's a flop. But if it exists as this hybrid, in between kind of device, that can kind of it can interact with Steam, it can interact with the Xbox marketplace, it can, whatever. It's you have the benefits of a walled garden, but if you want to go in PC mode and start screwing around, you could, right? I don't know.
Yeah, we shall see. I I think that's probably a long way down the road. I think we see SteamOS before we see Microsoft's reaction to it. I feel like
Oh yeah, I mean,
they're very
I think you're right.
distracted.
I think we're weeks away, probably. Right? Maybe by the end of the
Yeah.
year, right?
That's my guess. By the end of the year, we have something in beta or preview for people to fuck around with and try.
Yeah.
And then, we see a full general release next year. I mean, it's been a long time coming. They've been promising this since they announced the Steam Deck, that we would get SteamOS 3 as a general release, and we've never had it. And we've seen tidbits here and there, like an installer that leaked, and then we get some code related to the ROG Ally. We just get closer and closer. I feel like the last couple of weeks there's been a lot of smoke. It's time to see the fire.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. So, if you guys want to let us know what you think, do you think there's fire with all this smoke? How many weeks away are we from a general SteamOS release? I'd love to hear the conversation over in the Discord this week. If you want to write into the show, get your thoughts right on the air for next week's show, you can do that too. You can find links to all that and much more over at flipscreen.games. That's our website where you'll find all of our sister shows, places you can keep the conversation rolling, how you can get your thoughts right on the air, how you can show your support over on Patreon. All that and more. Go over there, click on some stuff. However you choose to get involved, we appreciate you being a part of it and spending some time with us this week. So, for the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.